Video game glitches. I would argue that they're one of the many factors that make video games such a unique form of entertainment. In layman's terms, they're mistakes or oversights in a game's code that can cause a wide variety of unintended results. Some are unintentional, while others can be manufactured by the player. Some have extremely practical use cases, while others can be quite detrimental to your progression and general immersion. And sometimes, you'll stumble across a glitch that is so absurd, so perplexing, and so unorthodox that you just can't help but admire it. However, there are some instances in which an entertaining glitch can also become a practical one if used correctly. Take for example Bloodborne. This game, along with many other FromSoft games, is notorious for its punishing difficulty. However, when it first released, players identified a glitch that fortuitously caused the game to become extremely undemanding. If you left Bloodborne running for a prolonged period of time and then returned later, you'd begin to notice that the enemies were far less intimidating and hilariously easy to overcome in battle. In fact, all of the enemies, including the bosses, now recycled only one attack animation and refrained from doing much else, making the fights in question an absolute cakewalk. This was due to a memory leak that would occur after leaving the game running for too long, which caused enemies and bosses to be relegated to nothing more than predictable husks of their former selves. It was unfortunately patched out in update 1.03, but the memory of this humorous yet extremely handy glitch still lives on. This is what I'm talking about today, bugs and glitches that are absurdly entertaining, but also equally as practical. Enjoy! Alright, so once again, let's kick this list off by talking about some Super Mario 64. I've spoken about just how influential of a title this game was, but what I haven't covered is its immense impact on the speedrunning community. See, the core fundamentals of speedrunning existed long before Super Mario 64's release. You could arguably trace its roots back to Doom's time records displayed at the end of each level, but it would eventually go on to become one of gaming's most ubiquitous titles in the speedrunning scene. A large contributor to its popularity in the realm of speedrunning is its vast assortment of glitches and exploits that can effectively allow players to breeze through or outright skip certain segments of the game. The most absurd glitch, and the most practical one if you ask me, is the now legendarily iconic backwards long jump. By performing a long jump and then holding the stick backwards while also holding down Z and repeatedly mashing the A button, Mario will begin to violently convulse while exclaiming his Yahoo voice line continuously and then propel himself backwards at speeds of Mach 10. Either that or he's reenacting what it was like to be at the receiving end of a firing squad during the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Now, it's admittedly a bit tricky to get the hang of at first, but after some dedicated practice and a little bit of perseverance, congratulations, you've just mastered the backwards long jump. But what is this used for? Well, when this glitch was first discovered in the early 2000s, it effectively became the watershed moment for the Mario 64 speedrunning scene, because hilarity aside, this thing was an absolute game changer, and a game breaker for that matter. See, the backwards long jump isn't just made for zipping around the map or giving Mario a perpetual seizure, because his velocity is so wildly uncontrollable that he's able to shift through walls completely unscathed. Well, physically that is. Mentally, he's just experienced enough whiplash and mental discombobulation to make him wear an Ushanka during the Red Scare. Of course, the ability to shift through walls also extends to star doors, meaning that Mario now does not require 70 stars to beat the game. In fact, speedrunners have optimized this strategy so effectively that they've even been able to conquer the game without collecting a single star. If you're curious, the current world record for this category is an astonishing 6 minutes, 16 seconds, and 600 milliseconds by Canadian player Suiji, which was set less than a year ago, might I add. That's pretty damn impressive. Oh, stealth games. Whenever you're feeling burnt out on action games or itching for something with a bit more of a covert flavor, stealth games have you covered. One of my personal favorite stealth franchises has to go to the Hitman series, which prides itself on allowing players to methodically eliminate enemies in morbidly creative fashion.
Both targets down. Well done, 47.
Or if you're just feeling a bit more straight to the point, the tried and true aim for the head and shoot method also works with some truly hectic results. The continuation of the Hitman series, which started in 2016 and wrapped up in 2021, was an excellent way of returning to the series' roots while also introducing a slew of new ideas into the mix. It was also, of course, not afraid to embrace its more goofy side, made evident by the, at times, ludicrous assassinations. However, the glitch we're talking about is a special case, quite literally, because while it meshes well with the game's occasionally silly nature, it was actually a completely unintentional unconventional oversight. In Hitman 2, if you own the Executive Pack, you're granted immediate access to the ICA Executive Briefcase. Briefcases have always been utilized in the series, but this one in particular is special. See, the series allows you to use most items as makeshift weapons, even the most unconventional ones, and the World of Assassination trilogy continues this long-running tradition. You have everything from screwdrivers that exhibit the same lethality as knives, to a crowbar that can crack open doors and leave enemies wondering why they've woken up in a storage closet with a pounding headache and a notable absence of clothing. Tell them it was a hangover, I'm sure they'll understand. The aforementioned briefcase, however, is a multifaceted tool of the highest degree. You can smuggle in weaponry without being detected because it's completely immune to frisks. You can conceal a large weapon and waltz around in public spaces without the judgmental bystanders giving you looks. Assholes. And when the moment calls for it, this thing becomes a device of farcical destruction. You can toss this thing at your enemies with enough force to knock them out cold, which in and of itself is just plain hilarious. However, when Hitman 2 released, the briefcase was on a completely different wavelength in terms of its practicality. If you use this thing to incapacitate an enemy, you'd quickly realize that something was a bit off. See, for starters, unlike most throwable weapons in the game, the briefcase would hover towards the enemy at a rather sluggish pace before eventually colliding with the victim's head. While this is quite the humorous sight to behold, the use factor itself did not stem from the slower speed. Oh no. For some peculiar reason, the briefcase was hellbent on destroying its target, as it was accidentally coated with a homing effect that would comedically lock onto the victim and only stop when aluminum and leather connected with a human head. This means that it's able to turn corners, phase through walls, and even eventually catch up to a target on a jet ski. Oh man, here I am, this is my little safe space. Not in my country, asshole. And that's how you become a dictator. It was such an overpowered item that the briefcase was eventually nerfed in an update with the homing properties removed, much to the dismay of the fans. However, in a humorous twist, the developers actually brought the briefcase back in the form of the ICA Executive Briefcase Mark II, which contains damn near identical properties to the original pre-patch homing briefcase. If you're even remotely aware of the history of the fighting game genre, chances are you're more than aware of Street Fighter 2. Now, given the 2 plastered on the title, you could probably guess that this wasn't the first fighting game ever made, but then again, neither was the first one. Far from it, actually. That honor would go to 1976's Heavyweight Champion, or 1984's Karate Champ, given that it pioneered the one-on-one arcade fighting style that so many future titles would draw inspiration from. However, Street Fighter 2 was the game that effectively laid the foundation for all subsequent fighting games, as it introduced so many concepts that are practically necessities in the genre nowadays. Combos, special moves, which granted were featured in the first game, fighter archetypes, the ability to select what fighter you wanted to play as, this game had it all. But that being said, given that this game was a first of its kind, at least in the scope of modern fighting games, there were naturally going to be at least a few bugs that managed to wiggle their way onto the surface. There is no greater example of this than Guile. Yes, Guile, the entire character. Sweet Jesus, Guile was conceived with so many bugs, glitches, and oversights that it almost felt intentional. For example, he has something called the stance glitch, which is executed by holding the stick away from the opponent, then pushing the roundhouse kick button, and then inputting a sonic boom before the roundhouse animation finishes, which causes Guile to remain in a stance that renders the lower portion of his body completely invincible. The only way to get him out of this stance is either by allowing the opponent to hit him, or by inputting his flash kick move. If you keep this stance and let the timer run out, you can actually soft lock the game, because the game itself is programmed to only continue when Guile returns to his idle animation. But this isn't the bizarrely useful glitch that the title is referring to. In fact, there are 2 that I'm going to be talking about in this video. Yes, 2, double whammy. Firstly, Guile has a quirky little maneuver known by many as the handcuff glitch. No, they're not pink and fuzzy. Guile does things old school. Plus, the military already fucked up his sex drive anyway. You start this glitch by inputting a flash kick done by charging the stick downwards before swinging it upwards and pressing the kick button, and then pressing the strong attack and forward buttons. The timing is relatively precise, but once you get the hang of it, Guile performs his standard throw, but after the enemy recovers, they're chained to him and rendered unable to perform any actions, including attacks. Guile, however, is able to move around, but his standard attacks don't affect the opponent in the slightest. If the Guile player is feeling especially malicious that day, they can essentially stall until the timer ends, concluding the round with a cheap and easy victory. Well, that is if you're able to detach yourself from your opponent. But fret not, there's a solution, which ironically enough is the other bizarre glitch that we're going to be talking about in this section, the invisible throw. If you charge the stick backwards and then quickly push forward while pressing the fierce and roundhouse attacks, Guile will initiate his throwing animation without actually accidentally grabbing the opponent, causing said opponent to be flung wildly out of thin air. It's like Guile's using the classic rug pull technique on his opponent, but instead he's just casually bending the fabric of gravity and physics to his will. Nothing to worry about, I'm sure. If you still didn't think this was absurdly broken, well, there are actually so many compounding factors that make this an outrageously useful glitch. For example, he can chain invisible throws together, and while the timing and precision can be a bit on the arduous side, if you're able to master this, you're effectively able to wipe out your opponent's health before they even have a semblance of an idea of what's going on. You can use this glitch to fully negate your opponent's attacks, as Guile is completely invincible on startup, and there's no definitive method that can prevent the opponent from being thrown. And on top of this, some characters become a massive pushover if they're unfortunate enough to face Guile, because depending on the circumstances, just one or two of these can annihilate an opponent's health bar, with the most notorious example being Blanca. If Blanca gets invisible grabbed while in the middle of his rolling attack, his health bar gets absolutely annihilated. This is due to Blanca receiving roughly 60% damage if any enemy interrupts his rolling attack, at least in the early builds of the game. In the modern day, Guile certainly hasn't lost his touch either, as he's consistently been viewed as a top tier in Street Fighter 6, and he didn't even need the handcuffs to get there. Kudos to you, Guile. When it comes to glitches, open world games are notorious for their abundance of them. It kinda makes sense when you think about it though. I mean, video games are already demanding to make as is, especially in the modern day, but open world games pride themselves on their sense of scale, player freedom, and immersion. So with all these complex moving pieces working in conjunction with one another, you should probably go into any open world game with the expectation of witnessing the odd glitch or two, or 5, or even more if you witness the catastrophic launch of Cyberpunk 2077, dear god. The Grand Theft Auto series, as acclaimed and lucrative as it is still not immune to the realm of bugs and glitches. Quite the opposite, actually, as the series' lofty ambitions and vast open worlds have inadvertently bestowed fans with some of the most iconic and infamous glitches that gaming has to offer. Grand Theft Auto 3 has the flying tank glitch, in which you fire a tank backwards, causing you to soar through the air. San Andreas has ghost cars that aren't actually haunted by spirits, but rather normal cars that are affected by a vehicle spawn glitch. Hell, even Grand Theft Auto 5 wasn't spared, because in the early days of its launch, it was plagued by a bug that caused vehicles to become completely invisible. One that I've unofficially referred to as the invisible boatmobile glitch. And don't even get me started on Vice City. That game caused me to develop nothing but pure contempt towards ice cream trucks. All I can say is, if you know, you know. Biggie finished the line for me. But the game we're fixating on is Grand Theft Auto 4. This game is home to one of gaming's most iconic and flat-out hilarious glitches, mainly because it just doesn't make any sense, but that's the beauty behind it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, well, let me introduce you to the swing shot. So Grand Theft Auto 4 takes place in Liberty City, a farcical rendition of New York City, and much like the real-life location, it has more than its fair share of parks to relax at when wanting to take a momentary respite from the bustling city. The violent swing sets, however, I'm not so sure about. Any of my New York viewers want to test it for me? Just be warned, I probably can't afford the hospital bill. The swing shot glitch is extremely simple to pull off. Hell, it's probably one of the easiest glitches to execute on this entire list. Grab a car, head on over to a swing set, the best one for the glitch being located in the Firefly projects, and simply accelerate against the swing set and watch the chaotic hilarity play itself out. Now, I know what you're thinking, C-Shift, how in the fresh hell is this glitch even remotely useful? Let me explain. See, the police in Grand Theft Auto 4 can, at times, be quite unrelenting, and given that this game allows up to 6 wanted stars, escaping police is going to be a strenuous effort. Yes, you can go to a pay and spray, and perhaps the more proficient drivers of GTA 4 can manage to escape the police with no hassle, but if you're miles away from a pay and spray, or you're just trying to acclimate to the driving controls after playing GTA 5 for a while, that's a personal one for me, sometimes drastic measures are necessary. If you reverse your car into the middle portion of the swing set, there's a chance that you'll be catapulted into the sky at the speed of a fighter jet. Don't worry though, because depending on the type of car you're driving in, you can potentially land on the ground without any damage. On you, at least. Old Betsy over here is gonna need more than a new paint job to hit the streets again. In other words, you'll be able to escape the cops in style. And if you happen to land near one of your apartments or a pay and spray, hey, that's even better. Now granted, there are some caveats that need to be discussed. The glitch can be wildly inconsistent at times. In rare instances, you might find yourself launching out of the car, sometimes the car will explode, and sometimes if you accelerate in the wrong direction, you'll just end up slamming into the nearby scenery, making your attempt at escape ultimately fruitless. But when it does manage to work, it's a surprisingly handy glitch. It's even more effective in the standalone expansion, The Ballad of Gay Tony, because in that game, you're able to unlock parachutes, meaning that if you pull off this glitch effectively, you'll be able to bail out of the car midair and glide to safety with your parachute. You wanna know the best part? This glitch is still possible to execute in every single version of the game as it was never patched out, so have at it. Interestingly, Grand Theft Auto 5 had a bit of a spiritual successor to the swing shot that I like to call the swing shot except it's a gate. title pending on that one, but was eventually patched out of the game. So the next time your bothersome cousin decides to bombard you with requests to go bowling, take him to the park instead. I'm sure he'll love it.
Roman, what's up? How about we go bowling?
Okay, so let's move away from fictional New York and head on over to a similarly fictional New York, except this one keeps the namesake and has a guy in a skin-tight jumpsuit shooting white stuff all over the place. It's of course the New York from 2018's Marvel Spider-Man, but for some, I might have just described a Filthy Frank video or a gimp with bad aim. 2018's Spider-Man was the titular hero's grand return to the video game world, and my god, what a kick-ass time this was. This was like the Spider-Man equivalent of the Batman Arkham games, cause, you know, it made you feel like Spider-Man.
Make you feel like Spider-Man?
But jokes aside, this was an excellent addition to Spider-Man's video game library. Now, the best part of Spider-Man 2018 is definitely its web swinging. It's satisfying, provides just enough ease of use to pick up and play, but just the right amount of advanced techniques to make it feel special. It's perfect. End of story. One of the cooler flourishes that you can perform while web swinging is holding down the square button and moving the analog stick in a specific direction, which allows you to pull off a series of acrobatic spins. At first glance, it might not provide much use case aside from flaunting your digital web slinging skills, but there's actually a decent incentive to do so. For every successful series of spins that you pull off without landing on your face, you'll actually earn a little bit of XP. Perform enough of these and next thing you know, hey, look at that, you've reached the next XP level. What the developers didn't realize, however, is that players would go on to abuse this mechanic like no tomorrow, in the form of a fairly amusing glitch. When the game first released, players discovered that if you perform the ball spin in the air and then landed on a body of water, Spider-Man would continue to spin in place, as if physics were an optional ability in the skill tree as opposed to a natural science. This is a neat little glitch that I like to call the Amazing Spider Ball. How does this come in handy? Well, you can hold this for as long as you want, because the game's coding mistakenly believes that Spider-Man is performing a trick in the air, meaning that depending on how long you hold the move, once you end this, you'll garner an exorbitant amount of XP. It was easily the most streamlined method of maxing out your level, but it was sadly removed from the game once patch notes came into picture. However, it wasn't completely abolished from the game's coding, because it still technically exists, albeit in a slightly altered format, in the PS5 enhanced version of the game. If you flip on this wall and perform a spin on this dumpster at just the right moment, what do you know, Spider-Man's gravity-defying ball roll is back in full swing, and can still lead to an ungodly large quantity of XP. So yeah, if you want to max out Spider-Man's level at a rapid-fire pace, this is the way to do it, albeit at the expense of Peter's spine. Poor guy. I mean, by the time Spider-Man 3 comes out, he'll probably develop a hunchback and be in the process of a midlife crisis. What's funny is that Spider-Man 2 actually houses a similar glitch in which you'll have to climb up to the Avengers Tower and perform aerial flips at just the right moment. And while it might not be quite as entertaining or handy as the previous glitch, it still gets the job done. Okay, so if the first entry on the list didn't give you a hint on just how buggy Nintendo 64 games could be, then hopefully this one will give you the bigger picture. So Donkey Kong 64 is a game with a remarkably high amount of glitches in its coding. Granted, you probably wouldn't notice them unless you went out of your way to deliberately trigger them, but it's still something worth mentioning. For example, as soon as you unlock Lanky, you can actually bypass golden banana doors just by sticking his hands through them. Or how about tag barrel storage, a glitch that honestly is just way too convoluted for me to describe in detail, but I'll put it this way, it breaks the game. Enough said. Or how about Beaver Bother? Wait, it's not a glitch, it's just a poorly designed minigame? Aw, fuck me. But the glitch I'm gonna be talking about is, in essence, this game's backwards long jump, given how it's become an essential component of just about any Donkey Kong 64 speedrun, the Moon Kick. So the Moon Kick allows Donkey Kong to majestically glide into the air like he's pantomiming the act of getting pushed on a swing set. Yes, that swing set. How else do you think he made it this high? Believe it or not, there are actually 3 different variations of the Moon Kick, but we'll start with the most commonly recognized one, that of course being the Slope Kick. Basically, you need to find a relatively steep slope, jump towards the end of the incline, then perform an aerial attack followed by a kick attack in relatively quick succession. If you manage to pull it off, Donkey Kong will begin to soar in the air before gradually lowering down to the ground. The other 2 variants require slightly different execution but still function in the same fashion. The Ceiling Kick, for example, requires you to find an area in which Donkey Kong's head is touching the ceiling. Run, jump, and then mash the B button as quickly as you can, and the ceiling will push Donkey Kong downwards, effectively forcing a moon jump. And then finally, there's the Ledge Kick, which sees you running towards a ledge, jumping, pressing B, and then mashing B until until you pull off the moon kick. It's arguably the most tedious and demanding to execute out of the three, but trust me, the payoff is ultimately worth the hassle. Why would you want to use the moon kick? Well, the moon kick actually has a variety of uses, as it's not only effective at reaching normally inaccessible areas, but also functions as a parallel to a no-clip cheat, albeit with more constraints and limitations. For example, if you moon kick off of this ledge on the island, you can swing yourself upwards and make it to the crystal caves long before you're supposed to. Or you can use it to bypass the banana requirements for the boss fights. Or simply, if you just want to hover up to higher areas without going the traditional route, then hey, that works too. In fact, moon jumping is such an essential glitch for Donkey Kong 64 that you can use it in conjunction with other wall clipping glitches to make it to the final boss without having to unlock any other character. They just unlock during the final boss fight. In fact, A. Whitmore set a world record for this game a handful of months ago, even while making a slight mistake during the final boss fight. That's some serious talent right there. Go give him some support. Oh, and also, someone get Donkey Kong down from the fucking satellite. My dish is losing reception again. I want to watch my Hell's Kitchen reruns, and Ramsey's getting so pissed that he's referring to DK by his first name exclusively. Donkey! That's how you know you screwed up. Okay, you knew what was coming, it's a glitch video, Bethesda was eventually going to show up, and don't worry, I think you'll appreciate this pick. Bethesda, what more do I really need to say? I've spoken about their bug-infested games in almost all of my videos, and they've been at the receiving end of more than a few of my punchlines. This time, however, I'm not talking about Fallout. Instead, I'm taking a look at a glitch that originates from the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the final entry on this list. Do I really need to introduce this game? It's Skyrim. It was acclaimed on release as one of the top 10 highest-selling video games of all time, with 60 million copies sold, and Bethesda hasn't released another mainline entry since then. There's a reason the Elder Scrolls VI has been in development for well over a decade. They have to knock it out of the park. Now, Skyrim, for as incredible as this game is, was littered with bugs and glitches out the wazoo, especially when it first launched all the way back in 2011. If you were unfortunate enough to buy this game for the PS3 back in the day, then you would have been subjected to a frame rate that started off at a relatively stable 30 frames per second, but the more you played, the more the game began to essentially deteriorate in front of your very eyes. Why did this happen? Well, apparently the PlayStation 3's frame rate would gradually worsen the larger the save file size got, more specifically once it exceeded 6 megabytes in size. Then there's the absurd Raining Mammoths glitch, which was an extremely close contender for a spot on this list. Basically, you'll sometimes spot a mammoth off in the distance, briefly hovering in the sky before plummeting to its doom. In more than a few instances, this can actually kill the mammoth on impact, which means that you can loot its body without having to lay a finger on it beforehand. Man prayed to God and begged for a week's worth of food, and God said, "Let's make it 3, but stop shouting towards the heavens, my son's got scriptures to read." You want to know the best part? This glitch is still prevalent in the game to this very day, even on the enhanced versions, which were deliberately conceived with the intentions of improving the graphics and ironing out some of the game's kinks. Classic Bethesda. And there's even a glitch that bestows you with the ability to infinitely jump by standing on an object like a basket, jumping, and then quickly grabbing the object while spamming the jump button. But do be warned, if your ascent reaches a high enough point on the map, well, you'll meet an unexpected demise. But the glitch we're talking about today is arguably one of this game's most iconic and outlandish. We're talking about horse tilting. Horse tilting is not an equine alternative to cow tipping. No, no, no. Instead, it's a glitch that requires nothing more than a horse, a third-person camera, and a climbable rock, preferably one with a relatively steep angle. Switch your camera to a third-person perspective, mount your horse, and find the aforementioned climbable rock, not too hard of a task in Skyrim, might I add. And then, after hopping on top of the rock, carefully tilt your analog stick forward until your horse is facing the ground. Then, dismount the horse and make sure you press the pause button not too long after, because you're going to want to save the game at around the point where your character is just leaving the screen. After saving, reload the game and watch as the chaos unfolds. Upon loading the save file, you'll find your character whirling through the sky at damn near uncontrollable speeds. In fact, you'll be soaring across the map so briskly that the game itself is still in the process of loading areas and textures while you're in the midst of gliding through them. Naturally, you could presume that this is great for discovering everything that the game has to offer, and yeah, you'd be right. However, it extends even beyond that. While it can have some fairly unpredictable behavior, horse tilting is actually viewed as one of Skyrim's most integral glitches, specifically in the world of speedrunning, as it's used to rocket across the map at an extraordinarily immense velocity. It is a fundamental speedrunning strategy for anyone attempting to finish the game. In fact, speaking of speedrunning, just a handful of days ago, this game's world record just got broken by Dank Slushy. And if you're wondering, yes, he utilizes this glitch in the run. I'll have a link for his run in the description. On top of that, there's also a variant of this that allows you to zoom across the sky while on horseback, which is equally as entertaining, although slightly less effective. But you know what? I think it's time for me to take a little break from Skyrim and hop right back onto some Fallout. I mean, most of the games in the series predate Skyrim's release, so surely the glitches are mostly non-existent in the modern day. God damn it, C-Sim, did you uninstall the unofficial Fallout New Vegas patch?